Good afternoon, everyone. I am Deva Mitra, and on behalf of Kalinga Literary Festival and our esteemed speakers for today, I welcome you all to today's Bhava Samvad discussion. So we have a very interesting session discussion with the eminent author and scientist, Mr. Rohit Manchanda, who will be discussing his new novel, his latest novel, The Enclave, with Mr. Aditya Nayak, well-known translator and coordinator, Center for Asian Studies. So I may request Mr. Naik to take the session from here, and I request our audience to be present and to take all the insights from our esteemed speakers today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Devamitra. Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start, I would just like to thank Team KLF and its virtual platform, Bhava Sambad, for allowing and giving me this opportunity to engage s- such an eminent person, Professor Rohit Manchanda, in a conversation. Uh, so, I would just like to give a brief introduction of Professor Manchanda. He is a renowned scientist who teaches at IIT Bombay. He is a professor of biomedical engineering. He has authored two novels and a history of IIT Bombay. He won the prestigious Betty Trask Award for his debut novel In the Light of the Black Sun, published by Penguin in 1996. Recently, along with his latest work of fiction, The Enclave, this book was reprinted under the title A Speck of Coal Dust. So, today we have here Professor Manchanda and we will be having a conversation over here. और आप सबके बेनिफिट के लिए मैं ये कॉन्वर्सेशन बहुत इंग्लिश और हिंदी में रखूँगा तो चलिए शुरू करते हैं सो today we are here to discuss his latest novel The Enclave. Before we talk about this novel, could you please tell us about your journey as a writer, Professor Manchanda?
Thank you so much, Aditya, for that very generous introduction. And before I begin, could I take a moment to extend my thanks, my deep
Yes, sure.
gratitude to Kalinga Literary Festival as well, and to Bhava Sambad, their online platform, to Devamitra, who's also helped so much in putting this in place. So thank you all very much indeed for allowing Aditya and I to have this facilitating this chat between us. Well, Aditya, about the journey in writing, I would say that urge to write has always been there in me from as far as I can recall. Maybe from the age of some 7 or 8 onwards, uh, I tried my hand at writing of various sorts and got nowhere really because I didn't quite have the idiom in which to express myself. I didn't really know what I should be writing about. I was uh, bewildered about that, and also, in a way, a little conditioned about what I should try and write about. For instance, I've described some of this in my first novel, A Speck of Coal Dust, where through the eyes of the protagonist, I've tried to convey this confusion arising from colonial hangover as to what sorts of subjects to write. That time it seemed as if the only things to write about would be, British countrysides and British characters. So uh, I later, paradoxically, in a way, I
Yeah.
later found the kinds of things that I wished to write about when I was in Britain. When I had actually reached Britain, when I was doing my PhD over there, then
Yeah.
it came to me that what I should be writing about is India, and what I should be writing about is the kind of lives that I have seen playing out in India, not just in India, in the sorts of places that I grew up, which were really very nondescript, which were really out of the way. These were the coal fields of
Mm.
erstwhile southern Bihar, presently Jharkhand. And
Yeah.
part of that whole psychological conundrum was that when I was there in the coal fields, I used to find those places completely uninteresting, completely dull and boring. Uh, Life on the other side of the fence was always much greener. it's only when I was at a large distance from that place that I saw what a very interesting phenomenon that place had been, both the setting of the both fields as well as the time that I grew up in it. And that's when my journey really started. I started finding my voice. I started finding the style in which I wanted to write, the register. So I'd say that was during my days when I was doing my PhD. And after that, it's been more and more of experimenting with various forms of writing. I got a novel out in the late 90s, A Speck of Coal Dust, which at that time was titled differently, but that's been reissued now with the Enclave. Uh, then I had a bit of a hiatus, but I kept writing. I kept writing my fiction, and a second novel came out, which I think you know about. It was called A Place in Mind. It actually won an award as a manuscript, but it didn't get anywhere to being published. In the meantime, I wrote this book on IIT Bombay's history, and then after that, I've written this novel called The Enclave. So that, in a kind of a capsule, condensed capsule, is the journey. Um, if you would, like to consider it a journey, it's been more of experimentation, exploration, and seeing what works for me, and then trying to bring it out into the wider world.
Yeah, that's actually a really nice answer to this question. So let's just move on to the second question, जहाँ पे मैं जानना चाहूँगा आपसे कि how did your creative writing emerge, and from where did you draw your inspiration for creative writing?
Right. Well, as I said, part of the inspiration was, in fact, a kind of nostalgia. While I was in Britain doing my PhD in particular, then I used to be gripped by this sense of wistfulness, this sense of nostalgia about the sorts of landscapes that I had grown up with and the sorts of people that I had grown up with, the ethos of remote little settlements in a country like India at that time, which was so very different from everything that I was seeing around me in Britain. It was like a universe apart. Um, and one of the inspirations really was to try to capture that very, very different world, primarily for myself. And then if anyone else happened to be interested in it, so much the better. But really, it was an exercise in trying to capture my childhood, let's say the scenes of my childhood, capture that very mm, unique and peculiar world that I had grown up in. So, had it not been so peculiar, I think I may not have had the spur to try and write about it. And the other thing that inspired me always and has continued to inspire me is to try and explore the magic of language. So language, I think, uh, has of course a great sway over us. If we didn't have language, what could we have done as a species? This is something that, along with things like music and so on, distinguishes us from various other animal species on the planet. The fact that we can communicate so effectively, so precisely with one another. And of course, in fiction and in poetry, language is taken to another level, if I might put it that way. So when I read writers of the sort of V.S. Naipaul, of the sort of Patrick Leigh Fermer, and Amit Chaudhary, and so forth, I also felt that I would like to just express myself through whatever command I had over language, jitna bhi mere paas tha. I felt let's see how I can now express myself as best as I can. So I had, let's say, if not a story, but at least a set of circumstances in mind, a scene in mind, the scene of my childhood. Now I actually wish to also deploy language, make use of whatever command I had over language to the best possible effect. Um, that is another driving force that has always been there to not just play with language, but also to use it as effectively as possible to convey, let's say, a certain sentiment, to picture a certain scene or to describe a character. So these are the two chief impulses, I would say, that led me into doing creative writing.
So एक्चुअली बहुत सही इंस्पिरेशन जो आपने अपने पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंसेस में ड्रॉ किया वो एक्चुअली बहुत ही हम उससे काफ़ी कुछ सीखेंगे और पर्टिकुलरली मैं सीखा तो हूँ आपसे बहुत काफ़ी कुछ तो ठीक है एनीवे इट वाज सच अ नाइस कमेंट ऑफ योर्स ऑन दिस क्वेश्चन सो मैं जो अभी आते हैं आपके बुक पे अभी जो लेटेस्ट आपका जो नॉवल है The Enclave, uske related, I'll just ask you a question. Your latest novel is based on the life of an independent woman in her late 40s. Your fascinating account of Maya's life is also supposed to be a nuanced portrait of womanhood in post liberalization India. So आप इसके बारे में अपने नॉवल के बारे में और पर्टिकुलरली ये कैरेक्टर जो है माया इसके बारे में आप क्या लाइक कुड यू प्लीज टेल समथिंग मोर अबाउट इट
Thank you very much, Aditya. And that question, I think, has special pertinence because it's so far removed. This the character herself, the time in which the novel is set, and the place, of course, which is Mumbai, the city of Bombay, as it used to be called, so far removed from all the particulars of that previous novel, A Speck of Gold Dust. So I sometimes myself wonder, well, how did I end up writing about such a very different uh, set of things? Well, I have to say that it hasn't been such a sudden jump because there has been another novel, like I was saying a moment ago, there has been another novel in the meantime. And that novel, A Place in Mind, was set both in the uh, coal fields as well as in the city of Delhi. So I had already made that shift. कि, रिमोट जगहों के बारे में लिखना लेकिन अब सिटीज के बारे में भी लिखना कैरेक्टर्स इन सिटीज उनकी कैसे एक्सपीरियंसेस होते हैं उसको जरा एक्सप्लोर करना दैट सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग सो देन what occurred to me around the mid 2000s when I was just watching life as it was playing out was that this might be a very interesting time to try and capture at that era. And the reason is that it is around that time that a lot of flowering happened in this country and I think elsewhere as well, but particularly in India. And when I say flowering, what I mean is, of course, there was the fallout of economic liberalization. You mentioned the word liberalization in your introduction to your question. So the economic liberalization that had been set afoot in the early 90s and then had progressed quite rapidly since then, actually, I think found a sort of apogee, a summit in the mid 2000s. And along with economic opening up, what I find is in most instances that there is also a social opening up. Social mores and social norms also broaden out when there is greater economic power in the hands of people. Let's put it that way. And the greatest, I think, beneficiaries of this sort of opening up were women during that time, as I used to observe it. So women found a great deal more freedom and a great deal more latitude to do what they wished to do, uh, also to be independent, because there was so many more opportunities for women to work and to live by themselves and to examine life on their own terms. Whichever whatever way they wanted to live, they could do all that to a much greater degree than it was possible earlier, I think. And when I saw all this sort of happening, I felt that uh, well, here is something else that could be maybe captured. And the third thing that I used to see was that because of this empowering nature of liberalization, both economic as well as social liberalization, women were taking some extremely radical, extremely bold, and interesting decisions as to how to lead their lives, as to what to do with their lives. Um, and that also was fascinating because I saw women take some extremely interesting lifestyle choices, for example. And very often they would be more radical, even more radical than the kinds of choices that men exercised. So इन चीजों की वजह से when I looked back after a period of, let's say, 4 or 5 years, having some distance from it, when I looked back upon that time in the mid 2000s and the late 2000s, तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि this would be an extremely interesting era to capture, and also even more interesting, even more intriguing to capture it from the point of view of a woman, and a woman who finds a great deal of self liberation because of this change in atmosphere at the social level, at the political level, at the national level. And therefore, the idea came to me, let's have a character here, let's have a woman who actually in the past has been, one of those that has been somewhat repressed, one of those that has been somewhat very inhibited about her lifestyle choices, but can now flower, can now blossom because because of everything that's available before her, and she does. So that is what I think dictated my choice of having, let's say, a woman in her early 40s who has seen a different kind of life before this, much more shackled, much more trammeled life. Lekin ab aake in her early 40s, she's savoring the fruits of all the liberation, and she's enjoying it to the hilt. Uh, so that I think I should stop there, because
जी
we'll move on to the next question. But that's the summary of it.
जी 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 नहीं बट बहुत खूबसूरत तरीके से यू जस्ट पोर्ट्रेट एग्जैक्टली द 2000s एंड अर्ली लाइक 90s का जो टाइम था, जो दौर ख़त्म होता आ रहा था, एंड अगेन द बिगिनिंग ऑफ 2000s जहाँ पे बहुत सारे इकोनॉमिक शिफ्ट्स हुए एंड बहुत सारे मूवमेंट्स भी चल रहे थे, एंड अगेन जो आइडेंटिटी होता है, जो मतलब लाइक अपने आप को एक्सप्लोर करना, और पर्टिकुलरली वो चीज़ आपने मेंशन किया अभी कि वुमेन एक्चुअली टेंड टू अंडरस्टैंड द वर्ड फ्रीडम, व्हाट फ्रीडम इज। सिर्फ एक जगह तक सीमित रहना इज नॉट देयर काइंड ऑफ थिंग। सो अक्सर अगर लाइक मैंने जितना मैंने पढ़ा है, मैंने हमेशा आपकी किताबों में या फिर आपके लिखावट में एक चीज़ हमेशा पाया है कि यू इंट्रोड्यूस many fascinating characters in your novels and any sort of work of fiction. But so मैं यहाँ पे पूछना चाहता हूँ कि how do you manage to enter their inner lives and portray their complex humanity?
Thank you very much for that also. And just to get back, hark back to a point that you made in passing, I completely agree with you, Aditya. You, I think, pick upon a very, very important point when you said, women seem to understand the meaning of the word freedom much more than men do. So, and I think that's because women, for such a long time, for centuries together, if millennia and so forth, have been denied many of those freedoms. You know, so when those freedoms are offered to them, when those tethers are taken away, they, I think, relish that ability to sample life, and to explore and experiment with life a great deal more than men do, because men haven't had such a repression of their freedoms. I mean, to no extent at all compared with women. So yes, that is very, very true indeed. So about characters, well, certainly characterization has to come from observation. One has, I would say, one has to keep observing people intently. One has to take an interest in people, observe them, uh, and see what lies at the core of them. For example, when they take a certain decision, what is in them at their core that is prompting that decision? So, what is the driving force? And the more you get to know people, the more interesting these things become, because you find that very often the impulses that drive people's actions are not the ones that you would have thought them to be, but they are very different indeed. And sometimes you couldn't have imagined that those would be the underlying impulses. And the other thing is that when you observe people closely, uh, you also find that they are there are always shades of gray. Someone who appears, let's say, contemptible, or at the very least, let's say, objectionable, will also have other sides to them that are quite laudatory. And equally, people who appear on the surface, to be really quite impressive, let's say, admirable, can have deep flaws in them. So one of the things that I've tried to portray in The Enclave is, even in the character of the protagonist, Maya, there are shades of gray. So one might admire someone like Maya for the kinds of decisions that she takes. One might admire her for her great longing for an untrammeled life and the way that she sets about bringing it about. One may admire her for her feistiness, for her great spirit, to not stand nonsense from people, and so on and so forth. लेकिन एट द सेम टाइम ये भी है कि उसमें भी कुछ फ्लॉज हैं माया में, और काफी सिवियर फ्लॉज हैं. So for example, she tends to look down on people that she feels are inferior to her in intellect or inferior to her in standing, and things like that, right? um, you might remember she feels this way about one of her lovers, Santiago. So she has very mixed views about him. He is a lover. She finds that he has a lot to offer her, but at the same time, she feels that he's beneath her in matters of intellect, and she looks down at him. She also looks down in the same way at others in that poetry circle that she goes to. Now,
Yeah.
this sort of hubris that she has, this sort of vanity, can also be self-harming. And this is something that I've tried to examine in the novel, in The Enclave, that if you go too far with this sort of thing, with the sort of vanity that you have or the hubris that you develop, then it can really backfire on you. You can become your own worst enemy. And Maya does that. She becomes her own worst enemy. Um,
Yeah.
and her life kind of crumbles because of that. So uh, I've also tried to develop other characters in the novel in the same way, trying to look at, let's say, complex characters, as you use the word complex, but trying to look at how each and every character can be quite complex in themselves and not one dimensional. Each one of us is multi-dimensional, not just two or three dimensional, and we can have very many inner contradictions within us which we don't ever resolve. So we can be a bundle of contradictions, each one of us. And this is again, जैसा तुमने कहा कि उसको भी एक्सप्लोर करने के लिए आपको कम्प्लेक्सिटी में जाना ही पड़ता है कैरेक्टर के, कि कैरेक्टर कार्डबोर्ड कटआउट नहीं होना चाहिए, one dimensional नहीं होना चाहिए. So one has to spend a lot of time, and I would say that the only way to do it is to spend a lot of time trying to get under the skin of your characters, and trying to portray them as fully rounded, many dimensional beings. um, that is the kind of thing I've tried to do.
या नो एक्चुअली वो बहुत ही सही तरीके से आपने उसको एक्सप्लेन किया. ठीक है, तो हम इसके नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन पे जाते हैं. सो एक्चुअली काइंड ऑफ आपने इसका आंसर थोड़ा दे भी दिया था, बट थोड़ा मैं जानना चाहता हूँ कि इन व्हाट वेज योर लेटेस्ट नॉवल इज कनेक्टेड विथ योर फर्स्ट नॉवल, और डू दे रिप्रेजेंट टू टोटली डिफरेंट और अनरिलेटेड वर्ल्ड्स. ऑल्दो वो थोड़ा बहुत है, अनरिलेटेड वर्ल्ड्स तो है, बिकॉज मैंने भी पढ़ा है, एंड the story of Vipul is completely different from that of Maya, or
Hmm.
that's set in 1970s and this is set in 2000s. But anyway, मुझे लगता है कि आपका like kind of there is a writing style of yours that connects these two novel in a certain way. So आप उसके बारे में अगर कुछ कहना चाहेंगे.
Haha, thank you, Aditya. That's also, I think, a very probing question. Partly, yes, I've answered that, as you say. पहले मैंने थोड़ा सा compare किया था, लेकिन I would say कि जो differences हैं between the novels, those are superficial. So those are to do with, uh, uh, the upper layers, let's say, of the novels. कि setting क्या है, locale क्या है, what is the time in which they are set, the period, and who, the nature of the chief protagonist. One is an 11-year-old boy in a speck of coal dust, and here in The Enclave we have a woman in her early 40s, Maya. So yes, there are those differences, but I would say that those differences um, are cosmetic in a way, because deep down both the novels have a number of similarities, um, and one of them you've pointed out, right? So one of the similarities is that they're by the same writer, uh, and certainly there is a kind of enjoyment in the use of language, which I hope shines through in both of them equally, which like I was saying, is one of the impulses that drive me to write in the first place. So, वो जो enjoyment है in deploying language, in using it as effectively as possible, वो I hope it comes through in both the novels, and I'm glad you think that it does. But the other thing is that, and maybe equally importantly, is both novels, I would say, are deeply psychological novels. So, in the in A Speck of Coal Dust as well as in The Enclave, like I was saying a moment ago, I've tried to get under the skin of people in general, protagonists in particular, but also other characters in the novel, and try to see what is it that impels them, in various directions. So, for instance, if if you have a character in a novel, what is it that brings them joy? What is it that brings them grief? What is it that brings them satisfaction? What is it that leads them to lament things around them? So, in that way, what I've tried to do with Vipul in A Speck of Coal Dust, or फिर जो मैंने कोशिश की है माया के साथ in The Enclave also, is to see कि जो the soul of the protagonist, can one examine that? Can one go deep down into the mind and the soul of the protagonist and see, what are the things that shape them? What are the things that shape their psyches? Enclave may, for example, to give a concrete example, what I've tried to depict, as again we have touched upon, is how someone who has been part of conventional society, let's say in the 1980s and 1990s, and been inhibited because of that, been somewhat, if not actively, but passively sort of repressed because of that, due to conditioning and so forth, can become a completely different person if the conditions around them change. So, we are as much products of the spaces around us. We are as much products as of the conditions we are embedded in, as we are products of our genes, of our inheritance. So, our inheritance can determine certain things about our nature, yes, certainly, but also social conditioning, so to speak, ethical conditioning, cultural conditioning, they play such a massive part. And sometimes we can only find our true selves within us when some of those conditionings have been watered down or removed, which is what happens in Maya's case. She finds that she has proclivities, she finds that she has inclinations, likes and dislikes that she never knew of before, because she was, her persona was so inhibited in her prior life. So, at a psychological level, I try to explore and examine these sorts of transitions, and also the sorts of, you know influences that shape the way that we think. And some of that is political as well, both in A Speck of Coal Dust as well as in The Enclave. In A Speck of Coal Dust, it's all very minimal, subtle, but in The Enclave, it's also fairly explicit as to how the political dispensation of the time can also shape the way that we lead our lives, can also shape the way we craft our life spaces. So, that is, I think, the greatest, and I think the most profound sort of similarity between the two novels that links them, is an exploration of mind space, as it were.
जी बट बिफोर मैं आपको अगला क्वेश्चन पूछूं तो आई वुड जस्ट लाइक टू कन्फेस वन थिंग लाइक बीइंग अ स्टूडेंट ऑफ लिटरेचर लिटरेचर स्टूडेंट भी होना ज़रूरी नहीं है बट द पॉइंट इज योर इंग्लिश इज समथिंग दैट uh, if one can just learn a lot from it. Actually, I admire you a lot because like for me when it comes to English तब मैं सिर्फ दो ही लोगों को ज़्यादा उतना उस तरह से देखता हूँ कि हाँ आई कैन ड्रॉ इंस्पिरेशन फ्रॉम. एक तो है हर्षा भोगले जो क्रिकेट से हैं ताल्लुक रखते हैं and second is you. Or what I have observed is anyone who reads your novels becomes immediately aware of your amazing way with words. To just उसके लिए मैं एक छोटा सा एग्जांपल आप ही के नॉवल से दो लाइन बस पढ़ देता हूँ. The Bihar church gate slow local pulls in. She climbs into a general first class compartment, gets a window seat. It's 4 in the afternoon. She's going against the traffic. So there are prime seats for taking even in general. She settles in, looking forward to the delights of ride to come. See, such lines actually inspire, like हम जैसे लिटरेचर स्टूडेंट्स के लिए तो दिस लाइक समथिंग एक बेसिक तरीके से एक फाउंडेशन ऑफ इंग्लिश इज जो आपने आपके राइटिंग के थ्रू में मैंने देखा है इट्स सो लूसिड एंड इट्स ऑल इन अ रिदम सो वही मेरा क्वेश्चन उसी रिलेटेड ही है तो मैंने अभी एक रिसेंट इंटरव्यू में यू हैव स्टेटेड दैट the novels you write are pretty much an excuse to indulge your delight in language. Please let us know a little more about your deep fascination for language. I just wanted to know, and for the benefit of the audience, particularly literature students, I wanted to ask you this question.
That's first of all so very nice of you to pay such a wondrous and a rich compliment to me, Aditya. Um, yes, Harsha Bhogle also has this way with words, extremely fluent, extremely expressive. Um thank you very much for the really very nice things that you have said about my use of language in my novels. And that passage, the one that begins with those sentences that you just read, is actually very dear to me because I go on in that passage to describe that train journey that she takes to Churchgate. Uh, and if one looks at that passage as an example, then what I've tried to do over there is, in as maybe short a space as possible, try to convey the essence of a Bombay local train ride. So, for example, all the sights and sounds that one comes across, of course, but the other really incredible thing about one of these train rides, as it can be in other cities also, but particularly I think in Bombay on a local train, is that there is a galaxy of odors also that comes your way. And every few seconds of the ride, the odors that you experience change. So there can be odors from within the carriage, there can be odors wafting in, smells, scents, some of them are perfume like, some of them are malodorous, and so on. But it just keeps changing and changing. And that is something that, for example, along with the sounds and sights, I've tried to capture. Now, that is an example, I think, very nicely picked up by you, of how uh, I try to have my novels evoke a certain time and evoke a certain place. It's never been enough for me to, let's say, plot a novel and then hold the interest of the reader through the plot devices that very often are used. So I've never meant my novels to be sort of racy in that way, or to be plot driven in that way. What I've always tried to do, which a lot of other literary writers also do, and most often better than myself, is to capture a place and a time and preserve it that way. Preserve it on the page, confer it a degree of immortality, if one is not sounding too grand saying that kind of thing. That is what I tried to do with a speck of coal dust, to etch, that certain uh, place and that certain time, etch it into the pages of a book as best as I could, uh, so that it could be discovered later and and be sensed later. So the important thing is, I think, in this sort of writing, is sensuality of writing. You let your senses grab, either through memory or through present experience. You ask your senses to grab everything that is around them, and then try and build a picture, try and build a passage in writing that will convey all of that sensory information, all of that sensory deluge that one is confronted with. So one of the things, as I say, I try to do is to evoke places, and evoking people is no different. We touched upon how people can be many dimensional, so one tries to capture that in one's description. And conversations between people, I think, are hugely illuminating. So I try to do that as much as possible in my novels as well. The way people talk, try to capture how they talk naturally, how very often they end up speaking nonsense, and but yet it means a lot to them because it's set in a certain framework, it's set in a certain context, and what sounds like nonsense is actually embedded with meaning. So conversations, sensory experiences, sensuality, characters in all their glory is are the things that drive me to write in the way that I do. And of course, the I feel that the only way to do that is to try and use language with as much precision and as much evocative power as possible. Too much focus on precision can also ruin things because you end up writing something like a report for a committee or something like that. Uh, so you need to tread that line where you have enough precision to achieve lucidity. Lucidity is one of the words that you use, Aditya, very correctly. So one tries to do that. Lucidity can come through precision, but one also has to have a literary flavor to it. So one also tries to do that through other devices, like leaving certain things indistinct, leaving certain things a bit vague, and yet trying to elicit a response in readers that will capture the moment that you're trying to convey.
जी नहीं वो अगेन वी आर जस्ट मैं आपको तो पूछूंगा ही क्योंकि और एक चीज है जो आई वांटेड टू आस्क यू आफ्टर दिस क्वेश्चन वो तो रहेगा ही सो ये जो सवाल है आपने ऑलरेडी जो हमारे इंटरव्यू के शुरुआत में ही आपने वो चीज बोल दिया था बट बहुत थोड़ा बोला था तो मैं चाहता हूँ और थोड़ा आप उस चीज के बारे में बोले कि आपका वो जो मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट है विच इज स्टिल अनपब्लिश्ड बट इट हैज वॉन अ मेजर अवार्ड जब वो मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट लेवल पे ही सो आप उस नॉवल अनपब्लिश्ड नॉवल के बारे में कुछ बोलना चाहेंगे मतलब थोड़ा सा फॉर द अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ आवर ऑडियंस
Why not? Why not? Thank you for bringing it up. It's always nice to talk about one's writing, even if it hasn't been published. Um, Certainly, उसके लिए वो endorsement आई थी, काफी strong endorsement थी कि उसको एक South Asia level का prize मिला था as a manuscript. But I think what went against it was just the literary climate of the time. This is my reading. Okay, it was a fairly long novel that I had written, and it was about the saga of a family that starts off in the coal fields and but then migrates to the city of Delhi. And that's where you may recall I was mentioning कि उस novel में दोनों elements थे, दोनों settings थे, उधर remote coal fields का भी और Delhi का भी. And I was trying to describe the travails, the journey really of a Punjabi family over a span of 3 generations. So I had taken on a lot to do, and therefore it turned out to be a fairly long novel. And also, I had written it in the sort of style that I like, which is not very racy, isn't very plot driven, and so forth. So it appealed to literary readers, I suppose, to the panel of judges that had a look at it and did it the honor of bestowing that prize on it. But I have a feeling that a novel of that length written in that style was not uh, it was misplaced in time, essentially in the, let's say, the early 2010s when all this had happened. um, the market forces of very many kinds that determine what sort of novel is saleable and what sort of novel will find a place in the publishing market. Uh, those market forces, I think, were not very conducive to this sort of novel being published and being taken a chance with, because publishers always have to take a chance with a novel, a manuscript that they are sent. And the climate, I think, was not the correct one in those days for this kind of novel. If you recall, late 90s onwards, and this is again coincident with a period of liberalization, late 90s onwards, there was a lot of talk about Indian writing in English, and a fair amount of writing got done that was also very sensational, in many ways. And my novel didn't really fit into that kind of slot. I think that is what took away its chances. But uh, uh, but I enjoyed writing it because I very much enjoyed exploring again, or just taking the reader or myself in a way through the arc of this Punjabi family that has been displaced from Punjab, has had to live out in distant parts of India and also in Delhi. And Delhi is closer to Punjab, so it feels more like home to a Punjabi family. But what I've tried to do over there is to see, what sorts of ambitions that family had for itself, what sorts of desires that family had for itself over a span of 3 generations, and how did those desires play out? How did those ambitions play out? Sometimes, it's not just individuals that have desires and ambitions. It's a whole clan. It's a whole family that has certain ends in mind for itself. And I wanted to see things through that lens as to uh, how does a certain kind of family make its way in a certain kind of world, and how many of its dreams get realized, how many of them get shattered. It's that sort of novel.
So is it in some way connected to the Enclave, or it's a completely different kind of thing, story? Hello, am I audible?
Ah, yes, something went wrong over there,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think from both ends, I guess.
possibly from both ends. So I
Huh.
was able to hear you, but I think I was totally blanked out. So I think maybe just leaving that behind, you were asking about links between that novel, A Place in Mind, the unpublished one, and The Enclave. Now I've lost your picture, Aditya, but can you hear me and can you see me, everyone? Hello? I can see myself, but I can't see any of the others.
Huh. I think there is a technical glitch or something.
I,
Yeah.
I,
So anyway, we हम और हाँ
huh.
ऑलरेडी तो काफी आगे टाइम थोड़ा इस बीच में चला गया तो anyway,
Hmm.
so I would just like to now ask you to read out an excerpt from your favorite chapter from the book. I think the audience should get a glimpse of this beautiful novel and also get a chance to listen from your own voice.
Thank you very much, Aditya. I'll read a passage out. I won't say that it's from my favorite chapter because one doesn't have any favorites in a novel of
Yeah,
any kind. But I'll just read a passage that I think illustrates some of the things that we had been speaking about.
yeah,
One of those things is trying to capture, let's say, the imperfections in a character, the gray zones in a character. So in this passage, Maya is with one of her lovers, Santiago, Santi as he's called, and I brought him up a little earlier as well when I'd said that she tends to look down upon him a bit, tends to bully him, even though he is her lover. And this passage deals with an evening that they're spending together, and she's already offended him by being curt with him, by being very brusque with him, and saying, you know, uh, things that he takes affront to. So now she's trying to make it up to him. So I've also tried to display over here how she can be manipulative, how she can, sort of please him when she wants to bring him back into her favor, and so forth, or when she wants herself to be brought back in his favor, is how I should say it. So she's just asked him for a drink, and he's made her a drink, and she's uh, drawing a sampling sip and sliding her eyes heavenward and sinking her eyelids. No one to touch you when it comes to muddling, sans she pronounces her verdict on the drink. At this art, no question of it, you have no peer. And it comforts her to think that this encomium of hers is not tainted by by the least humbug. She's side-slipped into sincerity. He really is an ace at it. This comes straight from the heart. Yeah, and already in that word, in the gleam of hope it bears, she records the tincture of mollification. So Santiago is already happy to hear this. And again she pats the patch of palette beside her. Why sit yourself down so far? Come nearer. Is that all that hard to see? He returns. Civil, but cut up and cool. Nothing for it but to up the ante. But if you don't sit here, she says, how will I enjoy this little turn of yours? Turn? What turn? His interrogative is phony. He knows all too well what she's driving at, but she's happy for him to have it his way. The lecherous Zamindar's the one that I'm thinking of, she says, appending a delicious to that as she pops a humus coated snip of avocado into her mouth. I haven't been treated to that in a while. Oh! And in the space of that short syllable, his voice and visage both light up, emulating the mercuriality of a pup which, banished to the doghouse a minute ago, has unexpectedly been pardoned its errantry. Shall I? He says, buoyant. Worked it, notes Maya with satisfaction. Worked my bit of expiation. A fail safe solution, this, asking him to do one of his sketches. I might stop there because I think we are running out of time, isn't it?
yeah.
Uh,
But it was
yeah, so
beautiful, beautiful.
thank
So
you.
just I would just like to conclude it with a very typical question: that what are you working on at the present, and what are your upcoming projects and all, and what message would you give to the aspiring young writers? Just in a brief.
Right. Well, uh, I hesitate sometimes to talk about ongoing writing, or projects, as it were, because I never know whether they'll see the light of day. And having had that experience with a place in mind, I'm always a little dithery about it. However, I might say that I'm working always, as it happens, always on three or four novels in the making at any given time. I get a bit impatient with just picking up one idea for a novel and seeing it through to completion, let's say from start to finish. other ideas keep suggesting themselves to me, and I keep trying to see where they will take me as well. So there are these three or four ideas that I'm toying around with. One of them is to do with my time in a college that I went to in Jalandhar for 2 years. It's a boarding college, and once again, when I look back on it, it's so singular, that experience, so peculiar, very, very different from what I had in the coal fields, and again, utterly different from anywhere else, let's say going to Oxford after that, and so forth. So that is something that I think might be nice to try and capture. The other is I'm thinking of writing a novel um, on my mother's life. Um I won't say on my mother's life because it would be a biography of sorts then, but surrounding the kinds of things that I saw uh, with my mother. So that's another idea, and there are one or two others, but let me not commit myself to anything. And as to this question that you asked about what sorts of advice I might give, well, I'm not sure if I'm in any position to give any advice, because after all, I'm not a trained, so to speak, writer. I've never been to a creative writing school or anything of that sort. I'm in fact, in my professional life, as it might be called, I'm a scientist and a researcher. um, so but what I do know is that if you feel that you have the impulse to write, if you feel that it is an urge that cannot be quelled, if it is something that in you that you cannot suppress, for example, and you must write, then try and make time for it. Do try and make time for it. Do try and observe things around you as carefully as you can and try and pen them down. Because the saddest thing, I think, in life is to have certain desires, and sometimes they may not be felt desires, they may not even be articulated desires, but they may be desires that are simmering inside you. You can feel them, you can sense those desires, uh, but you can't quite express them. And if you have that in you, and it's not just writing, for example, it could be some other form of art that you wish to do, some other pursuit in life that you wish to undertake, please try and carve out time for it and do the best that you can with it. It requires hard work always. One cannot get away with not doing much work towards it. But if you wish to write in particular, then what I would say is read a lot, read as much as you possibly can, um, and try and see what are the kinds of things that you would like to write about, what are the things closest to you that you would like to write about, and in what way would you like to write about them. Those are the two key things, and the answers to those can only come, I think, from as wide a range of reading as you possibly can manage. So please uh, try to do that, and just write without being too conscious of the quality of it, the quantity of what you're writing. Just express yourself on the page or on your keyboard or whatever it is, and the process of refining your expression will keep coming along as you experiment with it.
So it was wonderful talking to you, Professor Manchanda, and we learned a lot from you. और आई विश मतलब और ज़्यादा चल सकता था और डिटेल्स में आप अपना एक्सपीरियंसेस शेयर कर सकते थे बट एनीवे आई थिंक इट्स अभी के लिए on discussing on this novel of yours, this latest work of fiction, I guess this was so far the best conversation we had. So on this note, I would like to conclude that we are done with this interview right now, and I just want to show our viewers this beautiful copy of the book. So this is my copy. So so I just want uh, everyone to just, if you want to have it, do grab a copy of this novel and also a speck of coal dust, and it's available on both Amazon and Flipkart. So are there any questions from the viewers? Huh.
I think Sitanshu has said there are no questions right now.
And because
I think we've lost the
she has
link again.
been okay, so am I audible now?
Now you are. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would like to thank Sitanshu ji and Devamitra, and Devamitra in particular, because she has been coordinating this Vava Sambad, this virtual platform, very well, very efficiently, and she's doing a commendable job. And I have seen her in person also when the uh, KLF takes place every year. The amount of work she does, the amount of running she had to do, the amount of engagement with authors, publishers, sponsors, everything. So I would just like to thank Devamitra on that note. And we conclude here. And thank you so much, Professor Manchanda and Team KLF, for organizing such a beautiful conversation.
Let me add my thanks as well. It's been wonderful to chat to you, Aditya, about this the enclave in particular, and about so many other things related to it, of course. And you brought up some, I think, very nice, stimulating questions. It was a joy to at least try and answer them, and I
Thank
hope
you.
that
Thank you
to some
so much.
degree I have. So thank you. Thanks to KLF and to Bhavasambad and to Devamitra, Sitanshu. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope to see you all sometime soon.
Wonderful. So I guess we should
Wrap up.